Welcome to the Somatic Coaching Academy podcast with Ani and Brian. Join us as we explore the art and science of trauma-sensitive somatic practices and tools to strengthen your practice as a coach, therapist, or holistic professional. Master the art of motivating even the most challenging clients when you'll understand how to tap into and unlock your client's complete holistic intelligence. If you want to learn the most cutting-edge, research-supported skills for personal and professional mastery, you've come to the right place. Let's get this conversation started.
Hi, I'm Ani Anderson.
And I'm Brian Trzaskos.
Welcome to the Somatic Coaching Academy podcast, where you're going to learn how to tap into your and your clients' complete human intelligence. Brian, I just want to take a minute before we get rolling and thank everyone for all the support that we've gotten with launching the podcast.
It's been fun.
It has been so amazing to get your emails and to see your reviews. Thank you so much for being a part of this community. It means a lot to us to be able to finally bring these conversations that we've been having behind closed doors with our students in classrooms and stuff throughout the years, finally to the Somatic Coaching Academy podcast. So
been great.
Thank you for being a part of the community and sharing that with us. Before we get rolling today too, I just want to let people know that it's cross-mapping season. So cross-mapping is an amazing tool to help yourself and your clients rewire your nervous system. And cross-mapping is open for enrollment. So whether or not you want to get started on your complete somatic coach training program, or you're just wanting to get started with cross-mapping, now's the time to call our team. So it's episode 6, Brian, and I gotta tell you, I've been thinking a lot about this topic. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah. What's better for anxiety, Wellbutrin or somatic coaching?
Yeah, so we have a lot to say about anxiety, but this one in particular, I'm really excited about.
Yeah. So we just actually want to preface and start this podcast by talking a little bit about pharmacology and anxiety, Wellbutrin, relationship, those sorts of things, because anxiety is a really huge topic, right? We have lots to say about anxiety.
And a lot of people are suffering with anxiety. The numbers just keep going up. They're not going anywhere.
Yeah. If it's not the number one diagnosis, if you will, in the United States that people receive medication for, it's like number 2. It's like anxiety and depression, I think, like number 1 and number 2 for the most popular reasons for seeking medication, which I think is kind of like crazy. Right. I mean, the numbers are staggering.
Well, it's astounding, but I have to, I'm remembering something that you and I were talking about just the other day that I thought it was really wise, Brian, because I've had a little anxiety going on recently too. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But you were saying, I just don't know that our nervous systems are made for the level of technological consumption that we're in all the time. The phone's ringing, the text messages, the notifications, it's just like constant barrage. And I think you're really right. And I think that's one of the things that, we take whatever's going on with us very personally a lot of the times. But I think that that's really, really contributing to what's going on with us as a collective. Like our nervous systems are maxed out.
Yeah, absolutely maxed out. And so what's the wisdom around that, right? I mean, so and technology and AI is just exploding. It's running away right now. There's so much stuff going on, and it's going to be really to see what happens. And as humans, how do we manage this?
How are the humans
going to manage their mental health and their capacities and their capabilities and their joy, and their joy for life and those sorts of things.
Yeah, I'm really hopeful. One of our graduates was talking recently about how hopeful she is actually around the emergence of AI, because she believes that one of the benefits of it is it will allow us to take better care of our bodies and use our somatic coaching tools, because we'll have more time and space to be able to do that. And I think right now, a lot of us don't have a lot of time and space. And that can be one of the kind of causations of the anxiety stuff.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah. So let's talk about this
Yeah.
anxiety Wellbutrin relationship and how it compares to somatic coaching, if you will.
I'm really excited about what you're going to say right now because if you don't know this, we joke that Brian is a squirrel, and the nuts that he collects are like facts and information nuts. So I think Brian's going to have a little squirrel moment right
Going to go
now.
nuts here. So I do want to say, at the Somatic Coaching Academy, we've been credentialed by the American Association for Drugless Practitioners. So we just want to put that up front. And at the same time say, we're not against pharmaceuticals
No
because,
way.
oftentimes they're the one thing that people need exactly what they need. Number one, to save their lives. So let's say that's really important. Saving lives is critically important. So the next thing is also, it's oftentimes what someone needs to help them get through a really, really difficult patch of illness
Yeah.
and moving them back towards wellness. And that's really important too. When I think about pharmaceuticals, again, we're not against pharmaceuticals. We're really proponents, obviously, of holistic, natural processes that tap into what we talk about, the body's inner medicine cabinet, right? So the body has its own medicine cabinet. And so if someone is taking Wellbutrin, for whatever, anxiety, depression, whatever it is, or any other pharmacological substance, by the way, what it's really doing is activating a process within a person's body that they could do anyway. Because if those chemicals interact with the cells in someone's body, it means you're already producing something within yourself that interacts with those cells in that way. That's just how we're designed. So when we think about pharmacology, one of the things we talk about, a lot of people consult with us and say, "Oh my God, I don't want to take this medication.
Yeah. Right.
I've got this problem. What am I supposed to do about this? I maybe feel morally conflicted around it." And we say, "Okay, so listen for a second. So first of all, we're all in charge of our own journey around this." And we all have the capacity to use Western medicine or use indigenous medicine or use Eastern medicine or whatever we want to use to the way that it suits our own course of life, like our own choices. We should never feel hamstrung into doing anything by anybody. We should be able to advocate and self-empower ourselves
I was going
through
to
that
say that
process,
too,
through
like
that journey,
our own
right?
empowerment. Yeah.
Yeah. So when it comes to using pharmaceuticals and people have a moral quandary around it, what my take is on this is because if we think about how indigenous cultures used chemicals, let's just say chemicals, they were used a lot ceremonially, number one, but let's not talk about that. Let's talk about how they're not, because it's not fun to talk about that. It's just not for this episode. But let's talk about what would happen if someone got sick and then they used chemicals indigenously. It was the chemical use of the chemicals was always a part of a holistic plan. I mean, you also met with the shaman or the village elders and talked about what was going on. You were also given exercises to do. You're also giving breath work to do. You're taking walks down by the river and by the stream, right? You're out in nature. So it was a whole complex of things that happened along with the chemicals that you were using. And there was an expectation that at some point in time, when you come back in a state of wellness, you don't use the chemicals anymore,
Yeah.
right?
Brian, I was just talking with one of our graduates who is certified in using plant medicine, and she was talking about this actually. One of the things she's seeing is because plant medicine use is becoming more popular, she's seeing that the same thing that people have been doing with pharmaceuticals, where they get on them and they're on them for a long time, people are doing that with plant medicine now too. And so she was proposing that that's not how what's not what we're supposed to be doing with
Right.
it. Like, use them as a tool and then look at how you can, get off of them
Yeah.
basically. So it doesn't become a lifestyle that you're using whatever kind of
Yeah.
substance.
Right. Yeah. So any pharmaceutical experience, right, or to go see a doctor for, and in this idea of this anxiety Wellbutrin relationship, to go into the doctor, and if you're prescribed something like Wellbutrin because you're having a tough time, what my question is for the doctor, I asked the doctor this question myself when the doctor suggests that I take something, is what do I need to show you, or what do you need to see for me to not need to take this anymore?
Hmm.
So that I'm always kind of looking at moving back towards a state of homeostasis, to balance, where I don't require some chemical to keep me occupied, balanced, whatever it is anymore. And I think that's what's really missing when we think about in the Western medical framework, the use of pharmaceuticals, the use of chemicals, is we don't have an expectation or a plan to do something in order to balance our own nervous systems, our own chemical systems, so that we don't require something from the outside in order to help us do that. That
Mhm.
makes sense?
Yeah, it totally
Yeah.
makes sense. I mean, a number of people, I've been thinking back to all the people that I've seen over the years who have had anxiety and have asked us to do things with anxiety. And one of the things that people do ask about with somatic coaching is getting off their medication. So I love it when they ask about that. But the other thing that happens is sometimes I don't even know what medications people are on or anything, and then they'll report to me that through the process
Hmm.
of using somatic coaching, like, hey, just so I was talking with my doctor and I've started to get off some of my medication.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know that that was something I could look forward to. So
Hmm.
I love that we're opening up this conversation because I think that a lot of people would like to think they could get off their
Yeah,
medication.
right. But unless there's a plan for that, it's
Exactly.
actually, unless there's a plan for it, it actually doesn't get more likely that you're going to come off it. It actually gets less likely that you're going to come off it. So, can we talk a little bit about this anxiety Wellbutrin kind of relationship, how it works
Yeah.
neurochemically? All
Oh,
right, so,
yeah. Here, yeah,
so
here we
it's
go.
squirrel time. Here we
Yeah.
go. All right, so I did a bunch of research around Wellbutrin, and again, I'm not like trying to hammer down on Wellbutrin but it's just what we're talking about here in terms of anxiety and comparing it to somatic
Well,
coaching.
and physiology,
Yeah.
Brian, because as you were describing to me what's going on with the body in terms of Wellbutrin, I mean, it's really fascinating.
Yeah.
And we do a lot with
Yeah,
physiology.
exactly.
I think we forget sometimes that physiology, like neurology, physiology means like a lot of things, including the chemical interactions that are going on with
Yeah,
our
that's a
body.
big part of the
We forget
chemical
about that.
actions. Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about what does Wellbutrin do when you take it? Well, it has some interactions in your body with certain hormones. And so it'll uptick a couple of hormones and it'll downtick a couple of hormones. So two of the hormones that it actually upregulates are norepinephrine and dopamine. So what's norepinephrine? So norepinephrine is like adrenaline. It's what happens actually when you have a stress response. So norepinephrine increases your heart rate, increases your blood pressure, your breathing gets more shallow, your muscles get tighter and more
Contracted.
contracted, right? And all that occurs because of that norepinephrine output. So that's one thing that happens when you take Wellbutrin. But the other thing that happens is you get a dopamine hit. So it upregulates dopamine. So dopamine is a lot of people talked about or heard about dopamine, right? So it's the pleasure hormone. And every time our phone bings, we get a dopamine hit. Every time we're playing video games, we get a dopamine hit. Foods will give us a dopamine hit. Sex, a dopamine hit. Lots of drugs, like all the stimulating drugs, create a dopamine hit. And so that's one of the things that Wellbutrin is doing is giving us kind of a rush of dopamine. And dopamine has like a relatively short half life in the bloodstream. It's like you get a hit of it, and then the dopamine will kind of trail off, and then we'll feel like we're like in lack. We'll feel understimulated. We'll feel kind of bummed out. We'll
And then we
feel
want
like,
another
oh, and
one.
we need another hit, right? And then and think about it for just with phones, for
Oh
instance,
my
just for
gosh,
phones.
right?
How many times can people put their phone down and then they put their phone down and they're like, oh my God, where's my phone? Where's my phone? They feel
Pick it up,
lost.
pick it up.
They're
Yep.
waiting to hit something and hear a ding because that gives you another dopamine hit. Now, this is going to feel like a little bit of a sidetrack, but I just want to talk about this. This is really some really cool research is coming out recently about dopamine in particular, and that there's a part of the brain where dopamine interacts with, and that part of the brain is actually a kind of a balanced or homeostatic part of the brain, where the brain is every time we get a dopamine hit, the brain will automatically also release hormones that actually give us the opposite of dopamine,
Oh,
which
that's
like so
interesting.
it's like the pleasure pain teeter totter.
Yeah.
And so because the brain is always trying to maintain homeostasis,
Well,
right?
the body
So
is, yeah, right.
if we're like dopamine, dopamine, then immediately the brain's like, oh, got to balance that out, and it gives us a shot of pain chemicals in the body to keep it balanced. So
That's
bigger
fascinating.
dopamine, bigger pain chemicals, bigger dopamine, bigger pain chemicals. And so what it makes it
Mhm.
feel like is the more dopamine we're engaging in, effectively, the more withdrawal we go, the harder and deeper and more difficult withdrawals we kind of go through
Mhm.
with that. And so, well, a lot of the work that they're talking about is how important it is actually to begin activating the other side of the lever. Because when you consciously activate the, let's say, pain side of the lever, the body naturally gives you like create dopamine to
This
balance it out.
this just reminds me so much of cross mapping, Brian.
Exactly. Right. That's why
Oh
that's
my
such
god.
an amazing conversation, right? Because that's what we do with cross mapping. It's actually what we do with cross mapping.
Yeah, that is so cool to balance it out. I mean, with cross mapping, we're doing it,
Consciously.
consciously,
Yeah.
but it's like what we're doing with cross mapping reproduces. I mean, we knew this anyway, but I think this just gives further confirmation that the body's doing it naturally, and we can use processes to stimulate the production of that
Yeah.
happening
To actually
more
balance
naturally.
out the dopamine
That's so
and
cool.
anti-dopamine, if you will, receptors in the brain, so that we're not experiencing the anxiety or not experiencing the depression, because depression and anxiety really are both imbalances in our
Yeah,
physiology. That's really what they are, and we're just sensing them that way. So that's the two hormones that are upticked
that's cool.
by Wellbutrin. So norepinephrine, in other words, we start getting a little buzzy, and dopamine, we get like a pleasure rush that doesn't last very long. So then we're looking for the next hit to kind of lift us up again. Now, the other side, what's inhibited with Wellbutrin is serotonin and acetylcholine. So serotonin, most people like think, what's the difference between dopamine and serotonin? Well, serotonin, whereas dopamine is like a pleasure hormone, and when we experience dopamine, it's like the body's saying, "Hey, that feels really good. I want more." Where serotonin is more like a happy hormone, and it lasts longer. It has a lot longer experience in the bloodstream. And what serotonin basically is like the body is saying, "Hey, I feel really good, and I've had enough." So there's like a satiety
Like a
associated.
contentment
Yeah,
kind of
it's like
thing.
contentment. So there's a lot of contentment associated with serotonin, where it's like, oh, you know what? I've had enough. I'm full. I'm just going to enjoy how I feel right now, and not like
Right.
gluttoning.
Dopamine's
Saying,
like, yeah, yeah, and
more.
serotonin's like,
Hey,
ah,
good.
we're
Yeah, I feel really
good.
great.
Yeah.
And so that gets down regulated actually with
Huh.
Wellbutrin. Like that actually decreases the output and uptake. And then the other one is acetylcholine. So
That Can I
acetylcholine,
just stop you for a second there?
yeah,
Because as you're saying that, I'm thinking to myself, but that sounds to me like more like the experience of anxiety is
yeah.
like, So I think what you just said is, as I'm trying to track with you, it's like the serotonin actually helps us to feel that
Ah, yeah.
that grounding, that kind of like that we so desire
Mhm.
when we have anxiety,
Yeah.
but that's actually not being stimulated.
Not being stimulated.
That's
Right. So
wow.
you're actually getting more of a rush and less
I'm
contentment.
getting excited just thinking
Right.
about it.
Yeah. And so, but here's the last part of it is acetylcholine. So acetylcholine is actually kind of opposite interaction, not totally, but we think about it like this in terms of cholinergic nervous system versus adrenergic. I have hard times with those words.
I
So
can't
otherwise,
imagine why.
adrenaline based or cholinergic based. So adrenaline based nervous system is the fight and flight, right? The heart racing, the pounding, that kind of that stress response. And yeah, that one, right? Acetylcholine. When we have healthy levels of acetylcholine in the system, we have better nerve transmission, better communication between nerve cells. Now, if there's too much acetylcholine, can end up with cramping, activation in the muscles, that kind of stuff. We're talking about really healthy levels of acetylcholine. We'll feel on purpose. We'll feel connected. We're communicated. We'll feel present. We'll feel centered. All those kinds of things. So I just think it's fascinating that Wellbutrin, like for me, when I read that, I'm like, wow, we're seeming to do things that would throw people further out of balance,
Sure, right.
certainly for anxiety.
Yeah.
Now, maybe depression. I could maybe see depression, Wellbutrin being. And I'm not a doctor or physiologist. I'm just looking at what I'm looking at it through a somatic sort of lens. But even for depression, it's still a really short-lived boom, because essentially we're talking about with the whole dopamine lever. If we're going to give people a shot of dopamine and then they're going to tip the other side of that scale and have more depression, it almost seems like to me that the more Wellbutrin that you're taking, the deeper hole that you dig yourself in.
Well, am I going to get you off track to talk a little bit about like the chemical interactions with somatic coaching? I mean, like what chemicals are released when we're doing, say, somatic tools? Can we
Yeah,
talk about that
yeah,
real quick?
totally. Yeah, let's segue into there. So there's lots of great research around somatic practices, right? And so what you do, and you actually do get a regulation of serotonin, dopamine, acetylcholine, you get a down regulation of norepinephrine. So definitely stress hormones drop, cortisols drop. You have an increase in DHEA, which has to do with longevity. So, and there, Norm Shealy is a doctor, does a lot of work with energy medicine. And what he said is that if he only had to measure one hormone in the body that
Oh,
would
right.
determine how long you would live without any chronic disease, it would be DHEA.
Yeah.
And DHEA does get upregulated with somatic practices. So if you wanted to, so when you start looking at things like Tai Chi and Qigong, and like have this in our mind of these old people practicing Tai Chi and being healthy for really long periods of time, could there be some interaction between DHEA and the somatic practices? Well, we certainly know DHEA up regulates when you do somatic practices, right?
I'm just so glad we're having this conversation because I think a lot of times, like you said, watching old people do Tai Chi, like we see these things online and social media, we read about it, we see it in movies or whatever. And I think that very not very often do we think, oh, there's chemical things that are going on
Hmm.
in my body when I do those things. And so just having this conversation about the pharmaceutical stuff and the somatic coaching stuff and looking at how there's similar chemicals at play when we decide to utilize some of those things. I
Yeah.
think it just one of the things that I really like about the Somatic Coaching Academy is it's so practical. And I think it just brings it down to a real practicality. Like you
Hmm.
started talking about pharmaceuticals and morality and should I, and we go through all of these things when we think about
Yeah.
it very practically. There's practical chemicals that are being stimulated in our bodies with which either whatever we
Yeah.
choose.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's a whole, this is our inner medicine cabinet, right? This is what
Yeah.
we're talking about. Like you have a medicine cabinet inside of you right now. And when, again, we're not like against pharmaceuticals,
No.
especially if they are needed acutely to help rebalance your physiology so that then you can do something to help keep yourself in balance.
Yeah.
Okay. Versus taking them forever, because that's going to just knock us further out of balance. And with that said, if you're listening to this, like, don't get off your medications. Don't just jump off them today, because
Yeah.
but
These are
talk to
conversations
your
to have with your
doctor,
healthcare
have these
practitioners.
conversations, but definitely also look into somatic practices and look into somatic coaching, because when you do these somatic practices, again, we have all of these hormone cascades that occur in balance. So here's a little saying that we have. It's like, why you have your own inner pharmacy or your own inner medicine cabinet, and there's like a few great reasons for like using your own inner medicine cabinet. So like one thing, there's never a drug interaction.
Yeah.
It's like you don't have to worry about, I'm taking Wellbutrin, anxiety, Wellbutrin relationship, but I'm also taking something else for my cholesterol, sort of thing. And what will they do together? We don't have to worry about that, because your inner medicine cabinet
It's got
always
it figured out.
has it figured out, right? So there's never a drug interaction. There's never a drug overdose. Like you never inside of yourself make too much of something, versus
Yeah.
outside you can take too much of it in, but your body's never going to make too much of
And
it.
but can I just really quick side
Yeah.
trip on this? And that's something that concerns me sometimes. Being a smaller woman, is I know that some chemicals are actually pharmaceuticals are created not with me in mind,
Hmm.
and so I get concerned about how much I'm being dosed if I'm taking something. So I love that idea that my body's always going to know exactly what the right dosage
Hmm.
is,
Yeah.
and I don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, right. So you have we've already talked about no drug interactions. You can never get an overdose.
Oh, and how about the side effects, Brian?
Yeah, but hang on, I have
Oh,
two more
sorry,
though.
sorry, sorry.
Right. So the pharmacy is always open, right? The pharmacy is always open, and there's never a copay, right? There's never a copay for your own medicine
We live
that
in
you
the
like.
woods, and the pharmacy is like rarely open when you actually need it. Or if the in town
Yeah.
pharmacy is closed, we got to drive 45 minutes to go to the.
Right. So your own pharmacy is always open. Anyway, so yeah, let's talk about like side effects. So again, this anxiety Wellbutrin
That's cute.
relationship. Um, there's
Yeah, I
all
mean,
kinds of side effects that
we
happen with
know,
this, you know?
like now that I mean, it's been like, oh God, 20 years or so since they've been able to advertise drugs on
Yeah, right.
television,
There's
right? We know.
nausea, dizziness, vomiting. I mean, even things like suicidal thoughts, depression. I mean, all these things that it seems like what the medicine's supposed to be for is actually also associated with the side effects that occur along with it. And it's like, whoa, like what is going on with that?
Well, let's just be honest. There's side effects to somatic coaching too.
Okay, so let's talk about those. You ready?
Better
Yeah.
relationships, better health, inexplicable joy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Humor, outbursts of laughter.
Outbursts of laughter, calm. I was going to say tolerance, which I do mean tolerance, and the ability to be with difficult
Mhm.
situations, less
Yeah.
reactivity. We could just go on and on and on. Every once in a while, we have a fun haha in class about it because it's true. One of our students will be like, "Oh my gosh, this unexpected thing that I wasn't really trying for or looking out for happened,"
Mhm.
and it's like, of course,
Yeah. Yeah.
of course, those things happen.
So you want to tell us a little bit about some cross mapping, an experience with cross mapping for
Oh
anxiety? So
well,
we've been talking about Wellbutrin for a while here. So let's kind of segue a little bit into somatic coaching and anxiety. So,
yeah, well, like we've said before, we could talk about different stories
mhm.
around anxiety a lot, but I've actually been having some anxiety recently,
Okay.
in the middle of the night
Mm,
specifically. So I'll wake up in the middle of the night and um, characteristics of anxiety can differ from person to person and from episode to episode or whatever. But one of the things that we do is identify where in our bodies we feel something and what it feels like. And so to me, there's been this, it's very chesty,
mm,
kind of increased, buzzy, and it's like it's gonna come up and choke me kind of
mm.
thing. And I think that's a characteristic of anxiety that we see all the time is the energy rises,
Yeah. Yep.
right? And so it's in the middle of the night, Brian, that it's been happening, and, so I'm a little dazed or whatever, and it took me, I don't know, 2 or 3 nights to remember that cross mapping was a tool in my toolbox
Mm,
because I had to, like, wake up enough to remind myself of that. I was awake and I remembered. So I did some cross mapping, and I think what was interesting for me about it was, of course, I've used cross mapping for years and years to help me with all kinds of things. So it's routine for me. I didn't have to think too much about it. I
yeah.
just kind
Right.
of
Yeah.
hopped right into the
Mhm.
practice. What I did was I started to just automatically think about how I could cross map the energy to go down
Mhm.
in my body because it was so high up.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
what was interesting is I think it took me like maybe 2 or 3 nights to identify that what I really needed to do in order to resolve, and it totally did. It was great. What was going on is I needed to cross map feelings of safety.
Mm. Okay.
And, folks, like, there's a lot going on in the world. And so there's a lot going on in my life. We've got kids who are transitioning to college, we're
Mhm.
growing businesses, relationships, all the regular life stuff. And there's a lot going on in the world. And I think as a more empathetic person, when things go on, I can feel a lot. I feel bigly. I know you know
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
me.
We feel big.
I feel big.
Mhm.
And so it was really wonderful to be able to cross map for safety and not take that personally, like that I wasn't actually safe,
Mhm.
but that my body didn't feel safe. And to really, it didn't just allow my nervous system to settle, and yes, it did eliminate the anxiety I was feeling at night. I've slept for a number of nights now without it, and it's fine. But it really helped me to have, and this is that complete human intelligence, this
Mhm.
intellectual understanding that what was going on with me at the time was real, it mattered, and that I can tap into that throughout my day, which of course happens when we're sleeping. Things that we're not kind of dealing with during the day
Mhm.
pop up.
Yep.
So I can tap into that during the day and remind myself that I'm safe here,
Mhm.
and have that intellectual capacity to help myself out through it, um, which was it's really great.
Yeah, yeah. Something occurring to me as you're talking, Ani, is that for me, I think about again, we've been doing cross mapping for
Years.
over a decade now, right? Like we developed
Oh my
cross
god.
mapping,
20 years ago?
like
15?
yeah, over a decade and a half ago or something like that. So we've been practicing a really long time. And I'm not the kind of person who experienced, I mean, I have had experiences of anxiety in my past, but that's not like my go-to. Like my go-to is more like depression, like that. I'm more of a kind of a slow down kind of character.
Yeah, I'm
But
more of a
and you're more
anxiety
of an
prone,
anxiety
yeah.
character. But I guess my question is for you, because this is my experience, is that so I've done a lot of cross mapping over the years actually for depression, not really for feeling depressed,
Sure.
right? Not necessarily for anxiety. But what I can say is that over the last several years, like my outside life has gotten a lot more complex
Yeah.
than it was 15, 20 years ago.
Oh
Like
my gosh.
like multiplied by, I don't even know, exponentially more complex. But I experienced less depressive symptoms than I did 20 years
Oh yeah.
ago. And I'm sure that's because I do cross mapping regularly.
Right.
And this is the difference again between taking a medication or doing somatic coaching or using somatic tools, is that when you use somatic tools, I used to have this little saying is that I would make an investment in my well of calm.
Yeah.
Like it,
Right.
right.
It's like putting money in
I
your
would
bank
put
account
money
kind
in
of
my
thing.
calm bank
Right.
in my body. And medication doesn't do that.
Yeah.
Medication just kind of makes a little deposit and then you spend it right away. Deposit, you spend it right away. Deposit, you spend it right away. You're not
Yeah.
really creating savings that way. And I'm just wondering about your experience of anxiety. Is that true for you from
That's
anxiety?
that's a great question. I don't remember having experienced anxiety in the past. And actually, we totally need to talk about this in another
Mm,
episode. But it's been my impression that with clients and myself, that anxiety tends to crop up when I'm being called to uh, live life more open-heartedly in certain
mhm,
aspects of my life. And so, because I do cross mapping on a regular basis, like this thing with having anxiety while I'm sleeping, it just took me like a day or two and it resolved itself.
mhm,
And so I can have bouts of something. And because, like you're saying, the well of calm or the bank account, for me, it's like there's muscle memory.
mhm. Yeah. Yep.
Like
Yep.
there's muscle memory, there's nervous system memory that I know because I use these practices regularly, that my nervous system can kind of snap in
Mhm.
and snap up to that new expansion that I'm meeting myself with. And that's, for me, it's one of my favorite things about somatic coaching versus somatic therapeutics. It's somatic coaching. We are looking at like consciously looking at the expansion, evolution of growth, not just the healing aspect of where we are now, but
Mm.
the conscious evolution of our growth. And so the somatic tools, I can take them and use them when I'm growing and evolving and expanding. And because I've used them in the past, it just kind of helps me to do that. But you're right, right? Like the pharmaceuticals are more like, it's not like you have any lagging effects that are
It's like you're living
helpful.
paycheck to paycheck, right?
That's
Yeah, well, like yeah,
exactly
when you're taking
right.
pharmaceuticals, it's like you're living paycheck to paycheck, and you're not putting any
Exactly.
savings in the bank.
Right.
And I think like that's what the somatic coaching really helps you do, is it actually helps you put savings in the bank so that you feel more solid
Yeah.
as a human being on this crazy
It's crazy.
crazy
It's a
planet that we're
crazy
living on,
planet we're
right?
living on.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have a lot more topics to talk about in terms of anxiety for
Yep.
sure. We have some of my favorite client stories, Brian, are anxiety client stories. So I
Yeah.
look forward to sharing those in future episodes. So you can look forward to that. And, thanks for joining us for these important conversations. If there's ever a conversation that you would love to hear us having on the Somatic Coaching
Mhm.
Academy, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at info@somaticcoachingacademy.com and ask. We would love to talk about the topics that matter most to you.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, we'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We hope that this conversation will help you improve your practice and change the way you think about your work, your clients, and yourself. Continue your exploration of trauma-sensitive somatic coaching by listening to more podcast episodes at somaticcoachingacademy.com. You could be the trusted guide that people turn to help them with their most challenging situations and to reach their most precious goals. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.